My name is Marlene, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom watching my own parents sue me for every dollar I've ever earned. Across the aisle, my mother sat dabbing her eyes with a tissue, while my father wore that entitled smirk I'd seen my whole life. They wanted $12 million of my fortune, claiming I owed them for simply existing. But as I sat there listening to their lawyer paint me as a heartless monster, I held on to one secret they didn't know about. In a few hours, I would stand before that judge and reveal the truth about who my parents really were, and what I said would drain the color from the judge's face and leave my mother speechless for the first time in her life. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And please subscribe, because what happens next in this courtroom will shock you. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I was what everyone called the golden child. My father, Vernon, worked as an insurance salesman, and my mother, Phyllis, stayed home to raise me and my younger brother, Kent. From the outside, we looked like a normal middle-class family living in a modest 3-bedroom house, with a small yard and a minivan in the driveway. But inside those walls, something darker was growing, though I was too young to understand it at the time. I excelled at everything I tried. School came naturally to me, and by the time I was 8 years old, I was already winning academic awards and spelling bees. My teachers called me gifted. My parents called me their retirement plan, and I thought they were joking. I remember the first time I realized they weren't. I'd won a spelling bee when I was 8, and I ran home so excited to tell my parents. I burst through the front door waving my little trophy, my face flushed with pride. My father looked up from his newspaper and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Good, now you can get scholarships and we won't have to pay for college." I stood there confused because I didn't even know what a scholarship was. I just knew I'd spelled 14 words correctly and wanted someone to be proud of me. My mother patted my head and said, "That's nice, dear. Now go set the table for dinner." That trophy ended up in a box in the garage within a week. Meanwhile, my younger brother Kent struggled with everything I found easy. He got average grades, didn't win awards, and seemed to fade into the background while I absorbed all the attention. I didn't ask for it, but I got it anyway. What I didn't realize then was that Kent was building resentment with every achievement I earned. Years later, he'd tell me that he felt invisible in our house, that our parents only cared about what I could provide for them. At the time, I just thought he was jealous, but now I understand he was right. Our parents had decided which child was the investment and which one wasn't, and Kent knew it even before I did. By the time I was 12, I was working odd jobs around the neighborhood. I babysat for families on our street, tutored younger kids in math and reading, and worked weekends at a local retail shop folding clothes and ringing up customers. I loved having my own money. It made me feel grown up and independent. But that independence didn't last long. My parents had a rule that I had to give them half of everything I earned for safekeeping. They told me they were putting it in a savings account for my future, for college or a car or whatever I needed when I got older. I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. When I turned 17, I asked to see the account. I'd been working for 5 years by then, and I figured I must have saved up a decent amount. My father's face changed when I asked, and he told me there was no account. The money was gone. They'd spent it. When I asked how they could do that, my mother looked at me like I was being ridiculous. She said family helps family, that the money went toward household expenses and keeping a roof over my head. My father added that I should be grateful they didn't charge me rent. I felt something crack inside me that day. It was my first real betrayal, my first understanding that my parents saw me differently than I saw myself. To me, I was their daughter. To them, I was an asset. I remember one specific incident that still burns in my memory. When I was 16, I won $500 in an essay contest sponsored by a local business association. $500 felt like a fortune to me. I had plans for that money. I wanted to buy a used laptop for college applications and save the rest. But when the check arrived, my father insisted I sign it over to him. He said he'd deposit it for me, keep it safe. I never saw a penny of that money. Years later, I'd discover my father had a gambling problem and owed money to some dangerous people. My essay prize had gone toward paying off loan sharks. Kent watched all of this happen, but our relationship had grown distant. He rarely talked to me unless he needed help with homework. When our parents praised my achievements, he'd roll his eyes and leave the room. I tried to connect with him, but he'd built walls I couldn't climb. Looking back, I don't blame him. Our parents had created a toxic dynamic where we were competing for scraps of affection, and I was always going to win that competition simply because I was more useful to them. The saddest part is that neither of us was actually winning. We were both losing, just in different ways. Getting into Cornell University was the proudest moment of my life. I'd worked myself to exhaustion through high school, maintaining perfect grades while working part-time jobs and volunteering in my community. When that acceptance letter arrived with a full academic scholarship, I felt like I'd finally made it. All those years of hard work had paid off. I was getting out. I was going to build a life on my own terms. But when I told my parents, their reaction wasn't what I expected. My father's face darkened, and he said, "So you think you're better than us now?" My mother started crying, and for a moment I thought she was proud. Then she said I was abandoning my family, that I was selfish for choosing a school so far away from home. The months before I left for college were tense. My parents alternated between guilt trips and cold silence. They made comments about how I'd forgotten where I came from, how college would change me into someone they wouldn't recognize. Part of me felt guilty. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should have chosen a school closer to home. But another part of me, a quieter but stronger part, knew I had to go. If I stayed, I'd never escape the role that assigned me. I'd become their personal ATM, forever obligated to fund their choices while sacrificing my own dreams. College was everything I hoped it would be, and more. I thrived in my engineering program, finally surrounded by people who valued knowledge and hard work. I made friends who became like family, people who supported me without expecting anything in return. I worked internships every summer, saving every penny I could. My contact with my parents dwindled to occasional phone calls, and I was okay with that. The distance gave me space to breathe, to figure out who I was when I wasn't performing the role of golden child. But that peace didn't last long. Halfway through my junior year, my father called at 2 a.m. I jolted awake, my heart pounding, thinking something terrible had happened. In a way, something had, just not the way he described it. He told me he had a medical emergency, that he needed surgery immediately, that the bills were piling up and they had no way to pay. He needed $10,000. I was terrified. Despite everything, he was still my father, and the thought of him suffering made me feel sick. I drained my internship savings and sent him the money within 24 hours. 2 months later, my brother called me drunk from a bar. Kent rarely contacted me, so I knew something was wrong. Between slurred words and background noise, he told me the truth. There had been no medical emergency. Our father had borrowed money from the wrong people, loan sharks who were threatening to break his legs if he didn't pay up. My $10,000 had saved him from a beating, but it had nothing to do with any hospital. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I'd sacrificed my savings, money I'd earned through countless hours of work, and it had all been based on a lie. When I confronted my father, he didn't apologize. He said I should be grateful I'd helped him, that family takes care of family no matter what. When I said he'd lied to me, he told me I was being dramatic. My mother backed him up, saying I didn't understand how hard life was for them, how easy I had it with my fancy scholarship and my bright future. That's when I started to understand the pattern. They would always need something. There would always be an emergency, always a crisis, always a reason why I owed them. The amount would never be enough because their sense of entitlement had no limit. Things came to a head during my senior year of college. My parents showed up unannounced during finals week. I was drowning in exams and final projects, barely sleeping, living on coffee and stress. When I opened my dorm room door and saw them standing there, my stomach dropped. They didn't ask if it was a good time. They didn't care that I had 3 exams in the next 2 days. They came in, looked around my tiny dorm room with disgust, and started in on me. My mother cried about how much she missed me, how I never called, how I'd abandoned them. My father was more direct. He told me I needed to drop out and get a real job. He said I'd wasted enough time on school, and it was time to help support the family. I said no. It was the first time I'd truly stood up to them, and the word felt foreign in my mouth. My father's face turned red. He started yelling, calling me selfish and ungrateful. He said they'd sacrificed everything for me, and this was how I repaid them. Cartwright became more than a professor that day. She became a mentor, a lifeline. She told me something I desperately needed to hear. She said I was not responsible for my parents' choices, that their failures were not my burden to carry. She said, "Don't let anyone dim your light," and those words probably saved my life. After graduation, I landed a high-paying job at a tech company in San Francisco. Moving across the country felt like the final step in my escape. I worked hard, lived in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, and saved aggressively. Within 2 years, I'd paid off my minimal student loans and built up a decent savings account. I reconnected with my college friend Iris, who'd moved to San Francisco for similar reasons. We'd both studied engineering, and we shared a dream of building something of our own. Late nights in coffee shops turned into serious business planning sessions. We had an idea for software that could revolutionize supply chain management, making it more efficient and transparent. When I was 25, Iris and I took the leap. We quit our stable jobs and founded TrueLogic Solutions. Those first months were brutal. We worked out of my apartment, surviving on instant ramen and whatever free food we could find at networking events. We barely slept. Every dollar mattered. There were nights I'd wake up at 3 in the morning in a cold sweat, terrified we'd made a huge mistake. We almost went bankrupt 3 times in that first year, but we believed in our product, and we refused to give up. The breakthrough came when a major corporation expressed interest in our software. They needed exactly what we'd built. The contract was worth $2 million. I remember the day we signed it. Iris and I sat in our tiny apartment turned office and just cried. We'd done it. We'd actually done it. Over the next 2 years, TrueLogix grew exponentially. More clients came. We hired employees. We moved into a real office space. The company's valuation hit $28 million. My personal stake was worth approximately $18 million. I'd gone from barely scraping by to being a millionaire, and I'd earned every penny through blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights. I made a mistake then. I called my parents. I wanted to share my success with them, wanted them to be proud of me. Maybe part of me still hoped they could be the parents I needed them to be. My mother answered the phone, and when I told her about the company, she was silent for a long moment. Then she started crying. She said she was so proud of me, that she always knew I'd do great things. My father got on the phone and said he wanted to hear all about it. For a moment, it felt like maybe we could have a normal relationship. That moment didn't last. Within 3 days, my parents showed up in San Francisco without warning. They'd booked rooms at an expensive hotel downtown and expected me to pay for it. Over dinner the first night, they were sweet and attentive. My mother asked about my work. My father wanted to know about my apartment, my life, my friends. It felt strange, but nice. Then the real reason for their visit came out. My father had an investment opportunity he wanted to discuss with me. He said his friend was developing luxury condos in Florida, that it was a sure thing, that I could triple my money within a year. He wanted me to invest $5 million. Every alarm in my head went off. I asked to see documentation, business plans, anything concrete. My father got defensive, saying I didn't trust him. My mother chimed in, that family should support each other's dreams. I told them I needed time to think about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. The next morning, I contacted a private investigator to look into this investment opportunity. Within 2 days, Rex reported back. The friend didn't exist. The condo development was a scam. The paperwork my father had shown me was fabricated. They'd tried to con me out of $5 million. When I confronted them, they didn't even try to deny it. My father said, so what? I had millions. What was $5 million to me? My mother said I was being selfish, that they'd given me life and I owed them. The argument escalated into a screaming match in my apartment. My neighbors banged on the walls. My father called me names I won't repeat. My mother said I'd become a horrible person, that money had corrupted me. Finally, I told them to get out. My father got in my face one last time. He said this wasn't over, that I'd regret not helping them. Then they left, and I collapsed on my couch, shaking. I felt guilty despite everything. That's what decades of manipulation does to you. It makes you doubt yourself even when you know you're right. I called Iris, and she came over immediately. She held me while I cried and told me I'd done the right thing. But part of me wondered if I was the terrible daughter they said I was. So I compromised. I sent them $100,000 as a gift. I told them this was it, no more money, but I wanted to help them get stable. I set a clear boundary and thought maybe that would be enough. They accepted the money and promised they wouldn't ask for more. For a few months, things were quiet. I actually thought we'd reached an understanding. Then Kent called. My brother and I hadn't spoken in years. The distance between us had grown into a canyon I thought we'd never cross. But he sounded different on the phone, softer somehow. He said he'd heard about my success and wanted to congratulate me. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about our childhood and realized our parents had played us against each other. He wanted to reconnect, to rebuild our relationship as adults. I was skeptical but hopeful. When he asked if he could visit for a couple weeks, I said yes. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I wanted family that wasn't toxic. Maybe I was just naive. Kent's visit seemed genuine at first. We talked about our childhood, laughed about memories, and avoided the painful topics. He seemed interested in my work, asked thoughtful questions about the tech industry, and appeared genuinely proud of what he'd built. We visited tourist spots around San Francisco. We had dinners where we actually enjoyed each other's company. For 2 weeks, I had a brother again. But I noticed small things. He took a lot of photos of my apartment. He asked detailed questions about my finances. He wanted to know about my business partners, my clients, my investments. At the time, I brushed it off as curiosity. Later, I'd realize he was gathering intelligence for the war our parents were planning. 6 months after Kent's visit, my phone rang at midnight. It was my mother, and she was hysterical. She could barely get the words out between sobs. "Your father," she kept saying, "your father." My heart dropped. I thought he was dead. Finally, she managed to tell me he'd been in a terrible accident at his warehouse job. He'd fallen from a loading dock and severely injured his back. He was in the hospital. He needed surgery. The medical bills were already astronomical and climbing. They had no insurance. They were going to lose their house. "We're going to be homeless," my mother wailed. "Please, Marlene, please help us." I felt sick. Despite everything they'd done, I didn't want my father to suffer. I didn't want my parents to end up on the street. The guilt crashed over me in waves. Maybe it'd been too hard on them. Maybe they really were struggling. Maybe this was my chance to help them legitimately, and finally put the past behind us. My mother sent me medical documents, hospital bills, doctor's notes. Everything looked official. The total amount they needed was $350,000. It was a staggering sum, but I had it. I could save them. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the memory of the fake investment scam. Maybe it was how convenient it was that this accident happened right when they knew I had money. Maybe it was Dr. Cartwright's voice in my head from years ago telling me to protect myself. I called her that night, woke her up at 1 a.m, and told her what was happening. She said 6 words that changed everything. "Verify it before you send anything." So I called Rex, the private investigator who'd helped me before, and asked him to look into my father's accident. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was a terrible daughter for doubting them, but I needed to know. Rex called me back 1 week later. I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed, and I saw his name. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway with shaking hands. What he told me made the floor tilt beneath me. There had been no accident. None of it was real. My father hadn't fallen from anything. The medical documents were forgeries. The doctor whose signature was on the paperwork didn't exist at that hospital. My father had worked at a warehouse, but had quit voluntarily 3 months earlier. Rex had surveillance photos of my parents at a casino in Las Vegas 2 days after the supposed accident. My father looked perfectly healthy, laughing at a blackjack table while my mother cheered beside him. I couldn't breathe. I sat down in that hallway and put my head between my knees while people walked past giving me concerned looks. They'd tried to steal $350,000 from me with an elaborate lie. They'd fabricated medical documents. They'd weaponized my guilt and my fear of them suffering, and I'd almost fallen for it. If I'd sent that money, they would have disappeared with it, and I never would have gotten it back. The cruelty of it, the calculated nature of the con, it broke something fundamental in me. I flew to Ohio without telling them I was coming. I needed to confront them face to face. I needed to see their expressions when I told them I knew the truth. Rex gave me the name of the casino where Head photographed them. When I walked into that casino at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, I saw them immediately. My father was at a slot machine, pulling the lever over and over. His supposedly injured back showed no signs of damage. My mother sat next to him, sipping a cocktail. Both of them dressed nicer than I'd seen them dress in years. I walked up behind them and said hello. The looks on their faces when they turned around would have been funny if the situation wasn't so devastating. My father's expression went from shock to calculation to defiance in about 3 seconds. My mother tried to smile, tried to hug me, started to say what a wonderful surprise. I stepped back and said I know. Those 2 words hung in the air. My father's face hardened. My mother's smile crumbled. I told them I knew about the fake accident, the forged documents, the lies. I told them I had proof of everything. We stood in the middle of that casino while other gamblers moved around us like water around stones. My father didn't apologize. He didn't look ashamed. He looked angry that Id caught him. He said I had millions of dollars. What was a few $100,000 to me? He said after everything they'd done for me, I owed them. My mother's tears, which had seemed so real on the phone, had dried up completely. She said Id changed. That money had made me cruel, that the old Marlene would have helped without question. I asked them how they could do this to me. My father leaned in close and said, because we can. Because you're stupid enough to still care. Those words, that casual cruelty, finally killed whatever love I'd been holding on to. I told them I never wanted to see them again. I told them if they ever contacted me for money, I'd report them to the police for fraud. My father laughed and said I wouldn't do that. I was too soft. I'd always been too soft. Then he turned back to his slot machine like I wasn't even there. My mother called after me as I walked away, saying I'd regret this, that family was forever, that I couldn't just throw them away. But I kept walking. I walked out of that casino, got in my rental car, drove to the airport, and flew back to San Francisco. I didn't look back. The depression that followed nearly destroyed me. I couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. Iris found me in my apartment one night, surrounded by empty takeout containers, crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath. She didn't say anything. She just held me. My therapist helped me understand that I was grieving. Not just for the parents I'd lost, but for the parents I'd never had. I was mourning the fantasy of a loving family, and accepting that fantasy would never become reality. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than building a company, harder than any academic challenge. Learning to accept that your parents don't love you, that maybe they never did, it changes something fundamental in your soul. But I survived. I threw myself into work. I started therapy 3 times a week. I built stronger boundaries. I changed my phone number and blocked my parents everywhere. I told my assistant never to put them through if they called the office. For a year, I had peace. The company continued to thrive. I started to believe I'd finally escaped. Then Kent reached out. His email was short and seemed sincere. He said he was sorry our parents had dragged him into their schemes. He said he didn't know about the fake accident. He said he wanted nothing to do with them anymore either. He said he was trying to build a better life and asked if we could reconnect as siblings, as 2 people who'd survived the same toxic parents. I wanted to believe him. I was lonely. I missed having a brother. So when he said he needed some help getting back on his feet, just $20,000 to start fresh in a new city, I sent it. I sent it because I wanted family. I sent it because I was still, somehow, hopeful. The money disappeared. Kent went silent, and I learned, once again, that hope can be the most dangerous thing you carry. 2 years after cutting contact with my parents, I'd rebuilt my life into something beautiful. TrueLogix had expanded into 3 new cities. My personal wealth had grown to $32 million. I'd started dating Garrett, a software engineer I'd met at a tech conference. He was kind, thoughtful, and patient with my trust issues. For the first time since I could remember, I felt genuinely happy. I thought the nightmare was behind me. I thought my parents had finally given up. I was wrong. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. My assistant brought it into my office with a concerned expression. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, representing Vernon and Phyllis. The letter claimed I had made verbal promises to financially support my parents. It cited conversations I'd supposedly had where I'd guaranteed them a comfortable retirement. It demanded $5 million immediately, or they would pursue legal action for breach of contract. I read it 3 times, each time feeling more confused and terrified. I'd never promised them anything. But could they prove that? Could they twist my words from years ago into some kind of legally binding agreement? I hired Deirdre immediately. She was one of the top litigators in California, known for her aggressive defense tactics and her ability to dismantle fraudulent claims. When I showed her the letter, she read it carefully, and then said, "This is harassment, nothing more." She explained that verbal contracts about family support were nearly impossible to enforce, and that my parents' lawyer was likely hoping I'd settle out of fear. She drafted a response denying all claims and warning them against further harassment. I felt a small measure of relief. Surely this would be the end of it. But my parents weren't done. When they couldn't reach me directly, they started a campaign to destroy my reputation. They began calling my business partners. They reached out to investors. They contacted clients. They told anyone who would listen that I'd stolen money from them, that I'd abandoned them in their time of need, that I was a cruel and heartless daughter who cared only about money. They created fake social media accounts and posted long rants about ungrateful children who forget their roots. They found community forums where I'd been mentioned and flooded them with comments painting me as a villain. The damage was immediate and devastating. 2 major clients called meetings to discuss the family drama. They didn't outright say they were concerned, but I could see it in their faces. One investor asked if this situation posed a reputational risk to the company. Our company valuation dropped by $3 million in a month. Iris was furious. She wanted to sue them for defamation. But Deirdre advised against it, saying it would only draw more attention to the situation. The best thing I could do was stay silent and let it blow over. But it didn't blow over. It got worse. The threats escalated. My parents hired a new lawyer, a man named Rodney, who had a reputation for taking on frivolous lawsuits and occasionally winning through sheer persistence and media manipulation. Rodney sent a new demand letter, this time threatening to sue for elder abuse and financial abandonment. The letter was filled with legal jargon that made my head spin, but the message was clear. Give them $7 million, or they'd take me to court and drag my name through every news outlet they could find. They'd make sure everyone knew I was the daughter who abandoned her disabled father and heartbroken mother. My relationship with Garrett started to crack under the pressure. At first, he was supportive. He held me when I cried and told me we'd get through this together. But then my parents found him. I don't know how they got his contact information, but they sent him packages of fabricated evidence, fake emails where I supposedly said terrible things about them, doctored photos that made it look like I'd been living in luxury while they suffered, manipulated text message screenshots showing me being cruel. None of it was real, but it was convincing enough to plant seeds of doubt. Garrett started asking questions. Is there any truth to what they're saying? Did you really say those things? Are you sure you're telling me everything? Each question felt like a betrayal. I showed him proof that the evidence was fake. I explained the years of manipulation and lies. But doubt, once introduced, is hard to eliminate. Our conversations became tense. He said he believed me, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The stress was killing our relationship, and my parents knew it. That was part of their strategy. Isolate me. Make everyone doubt me. Destroy my life piece by piece until I had no choice but to give them what they wanted. Kent's involvement deepened in ways I didn't discover until later. He posted on social media about toxic siblings, never mentioning my name but making it clear who he meant. He talked about successful family members who forget where they came from, who become arrogant and cruel. The post went viral in our extended family. Suddenly, aunts and uncles I barely knew were reaching out to tell me how disappointed they were in me. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade sent messages about family loyalty and responsibility. An invitation to a family reunion was rescinded. I was being erased from my own family tree, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Deirdre built a case file documenting every instance of harassment. She prepared cease and desist letters. She filed for a restraining order against my parents. But legal processes move slowly, and my parents were relentless. The breaking point came when they showed up at my office building. Security called me to say there were 2 people in the lobby causing a disturbance and claiming to be my parents. I told security to remove them, but not before they'd made a scene. My father shouted that I'd stolen his money. My mother sobbed dramatically for anyone with a camera phone. Someone recorded it and posted it online. Within hours, the video was on local news with the headline, "Elderly couple claims tech millionaire daughter abandoned them." I watched myself become a villain in real time. The comments online were brutal. People who knew nothing about the situation called me every name imaginable. Strangers said I deserved to lose everything. Someone started a petition demanding I be removed from my own company. I had to hire a bodyguard because the threats escalated from online harassment to real-world danger. His name was Wade. A former Marine who had worked private security for years. Having him follow me everywhere made me feel like a prisoner in my own life. Garrett couldn't take it anymore. He said he loved me, but he couldn't handle the drama. He said my family was too much, that he'd signed up for a relationship, not a war. He broke up with me over dinner at a restaurant where we'd had our first date. I sat there in that chair, listening to him explain why he was leaving, and I felt something inside me shut down. I'd lost my family. I'd lost my reputation. Now I was losing the man I thought I'd build a future with. I went home that night and didn't get out of bed for 3 days. Iris came over with food and forced me to eat. She said, "You're stronger than this. Don't let them win." But I felt like I'd already lost everything that mattered. The official lawsuit landed on my desk on a Monday morning 6 months later. My parents were suing me for $12 million. The claims were detailed and damning. They alleged financial elder abuse, breach of an oral contract to provide for them, and emotional distress. The complaint painted me as a daughter who had promised to take care of her parents, and then abandoned them once she became wealthy. It cited specific conversations that had supposedly happened, promises Id allegedly made, and obligations Id supposedly shirked. Reading through it felt surreal, like reading fiction about someone else's life. The media picked up the story immediately. My face was on news networks. Tech heiress sued by impoverished parents. The angle was always the same. Successful young woman forgets her roots and leaves her elderly parents to suffer. No one asked for my side of the story. No one questioned whether my parents might be lying. The narrative was too juicy, too perfect. Rich person bad, poor elderly people good. It was simple and compelling, and completely false. Online comments were vicious. How could she abandon her own parents? I'd give anything to have my parents still alive. She deserves to lose everything. Some people sent death threats to my business email and personal social media accounts. I had to hire Wade permanently. The threats were too numerous and too specific to ignore. He accompanied me everywhere. To the office, to the grocery store, to therapy appointments. Having a bodyguard made me feel simultaneously safer and more vulnerable. It was a constant reminder that my life had spiraled so far out of control that I needed protection from strangers who hated me based on lies. I stopped going out unless absolutely necessary. I worked from home when I could. I became a ghost in my own life. The relationship with Garrett was truly over. But I discovered the final twist months later. Iris did some digging and found out that Garrett had been in contact with Kent during the last months of our relationship. My brother had reached out to him on social media, pretending to be concerned about me. Kent had fed Garrett carefully crafted lies about my supposed cruelty toward our parents. Had sent him more fake evidence. Had slowly poisoned Garrett's perception of me, until doubt became certainty, and certainty became the decision to leave. When I learned this, I felt nothing. It moved beyond heartbreak into a kind of numbness that was almost peaceful. Deirdre earned every penny of her considerable fees by digging into my parents' background with the help of a forensic accountant. What they uncovered was staggering. My parents had run this same scam before, just not on this scale. The forensic accountant found records showing that when Kent was 21, had inherited $50,000 from our grandmother. I'd been away at college, and hadn't known about the inheritance. Our parents had convinced Kent that they'd invest the money for him, help him grow it, secure his future. Within 6 months, the entire $50,000 was gone. They'd spent it on vacations, gambling, and paying off debts. The twisted part was what happened next. Our parents convinced Kent that I was somehow responsible for his lost inheritance. They told him I'd influenced their investment decisions, that I'd suggested the strategies that failed, that I was jealous of his good fortune. It was completely fabricated, but Kent believed them. That's where his resentment truly solidified. He blamed me for losing his inheritance when our parents were the ones who'd stolen it. They'd manipulated him so thoroughly that he couldn't see the truth even when it was right in front of him. And now, years later, they'd recruited him into their lawsuit against me, with promises of a cut of the settlement money. Rex, my private investigator, found something even more damning. My parents had been planning this lawsuit for 3 years, since they'd first learned about my business success. They'd kept records of every interaction Wed had. They'd documented times I'd given them money, and times I'd refused. They'd collected what they called evidence, though most of it was manipulated or taken out of context. They'd consulted with multiple lawyers to find one willing to take the case. They'd built a strategy to maximize sympathy and minimize scrutiny. This wasn't a desperate act by struggling parents. This was a calculated, premeditated fraud designed to extract as much money from me as possible. The conspiracy went deeper. Extended family members had been recruited. My cousin Laverne had agreed to testify against me for $10,000. She was going to tell the court that I'd always been cold and superior, that I'd treated our parents terribly at family gatherings. None of it was true, but she needed the money, and my parents were paying. A neighbor from my childhood, an elderly woman named Myrtle, who barely knew our family, had been paid $5,000 to say what a perfect family we'd been, and how ungrateful it always seemed. My parents were building an army of witnesses willing to lie under oath for cash. The depositions were torture. My parents' lawyer, Rodney, was aggressive and demeaning. He asked invasive questions about my finances, my relationships, my therapy. He made my success sound like evidence of greed, rather than hard work. He twisted every answer I gave. When I explained that I'd sent my parents money multiple times, he asked why I'd stopped. When I described their attempts to scam me, He suggested I was making excuses. When I mentioned the fake accident, he said I was slandering my disabled father. I left that deposition shaking and exhausted. My parents' depositions were performances. My father played the role of suffering victim perfectly. He struggled to stand, winced dramatically as he sat, and spoke in a weak voice about his back injury that would never heal. He talked about working 3 jobs to support my education. A complete lie. He described sacrificing his dreams so I could chase mine. He said all he wanted was to see his daughter again, to be a family. My mother cried on cue. She dabbed her eyes with tissues and talked about how much she missed me. She said she just wanted her little girl back. She described living in poverty now, unable to afford basic necessities, all because of medical bills from my father's accident. The lies flowed so smoothly that I almost admired the craft of it. Kent testified and broke my heart all over again. He sat in that chair and lied under oath without hesitation. He said Id explicitly promised to take care of everyone in the family once I became successful. He claimed Id laughed when our father got injured. He described me as obsessed with money since childhood, cold and calculating. He even said Id stolen his inheritance from our grandmother, reversing the truth so completely that I wondered if he actually believed his own lies. Deirdre tried to break him on cross-examination, but he was well rehearsed. The jury believed him. I could see it in their faces. My parents' legal strategy included trying to subpoena my therapy records. They wanted to use my history of panic attacks as evidence that I was mentally unstable. They requested my business records to paint me as money-obsessed. They brought in character witnesses who barely knew me but were willing to say, "It'd always been difficult and selfish." Every aspect of my life was being dissected and distorted. Deirdre fought back hard, but the damage was being done. Public opinion was firmly against me. Even some of my business associates started distancing themselves from the controversy. The night before trial, I seriously considered settling. Not because they deserved anything, but because I was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being portrayed as a monster. Tired of watching my life get destroyed piece by piece. I called Iris at midnight and told her I was thinking about just giving them money to make it stop. She drove to my apartment immediately. She grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "If you give them money now, they will never stop. They will come back again and again until you have nothing left. You have to fight this. You have to win." Deirdre called me at 6 in the morning on the day trial was supposed to start. I'd barely slept. She said I found something big. Get to my office now. I drove through empty streets as the sun rose, Wade following in his car behind me. When I walked into Deirdre's office, she played me a recording. It was Kent's voice, and my parents' voices, and they were planning everything, every lie, every manipulation, every piece of fake evidence. The recording was from 3 years ago, before the lawsuit had even been filed. In it, my father said she owes us, we made her. My mother said, well, take everything she has, and Kent asked, when do I get my share? It was proof of conspiracy, of fraud, of perjury. It was the smoking gun we needed. The courthouse was packed on the first day of trial. News vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions as I walked up the steps with Deirdre on one side and Wade on the other. I kept my head down and my expression neutral. Inside, the courtroom was filled with spectators, journalists, and people who'd come just to watch the drama unfold. The judge was Honorable Thaddeus Brennan, a stern man in his late 60s with a reputation for running a tight courtroom and tolerating no nonsense. He took his seat and looked out over the crowd with an expression that gave nothing away. When my parents entered, I barely recognized them. My mother was in a wheelchair, something I'd never seen before. She looked frail and elderly in a way she hadn't just months earlier. My father walked with a cane, limping dramatically and wincing with each step. They'd dressed simply, like people who couldn't afford nice clothes. The contrast between us was stark. I was in a professional suit, looking every bit the successful tech executive. They looked like impoverished elderly people at the mercy of their cruel daughter. The optics were terrible, and they knew it. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue as she was wheeled to her seat. My father sat down slowly, making sure everyone saw his supposed pain. Rodney's opening statement was masterful in its manipulation. He told a story about 2 loving parents who sacrificed everything for their gifted daughter. He talked about the father who worked himself to exhaustion to provide opportunities, the mother who gave up her career dreams to raise her children, the daughter who promised to make it all worthwhile by taking care of them in their old age. He showed photos of my mansion on a projector, except it wasn't actually my house. It was Iris' house, but he implied it was mine. He contrasted those photos with images of my parents' modest home, making sure the jury saw the vast difference in our circumstances. The first witness was my cousin Laverne. She testified that Id always acted superior at family gatherings, that Id been rude to my parents, that Id made it clear I thought I was better than everyone else. Deirdre's cross-examination revealed that Laverne owed my father gambling money and had been paid $10,000 for her testimony, but the damage was done. The jury had heard someone from my own family call me arrogant and cruel. The second witness was Kent. My brother sat in that witness chair and lied with such conviction that I almost believed him myself. He said Id explicitly promised to take care of everyone. He claimed Id laughed when our father got injured. He described me as obsessed with money since childhood, someone who valued wealth over relationships. His testimony was the most damaging because he was my brother. Blood. The jury believed him completely. The third witness was Myrtle. The elderly neighbor had been paid to lie. She testified about what a perfect family we'd been when I was growing up, how my parents had been devoted and loving, and how Id always seemed ungrateful. Deirdre got her to admit on cross-examination that she barely knew our family and had been paid $5,000, but again, the initial testimony left an impression. Then came my father's turn to testify. He struggled to stand, supported by Rodney. He winced as he made his way to the witness chair. He spoke in a weak voice about sacrificing everything for my education, working multiple jobs, going without so I could have opportunities. None of it was true, but he sold it beautifully. My father described the accident in vivid detail. The fall from the loading dock, the searing pain in his back, the months of recovery, the medical bills that buried them. He showed emotion when talking about how Id cut off contact, how much it hurt to be abandoned by his daughter. He said he didn't want to sue me, that this was a last resort, that he just wanted to be able to afford his medical care and maybe rebuild a relationship with me. The jury was captivated. Several members leaned forward, hanging on his every word. When Rodney asked about the promises Id supposedly made, my father said Id told him multiple times that Id take care of them, that family was forever, that they'd never have to worry. My mother's testimony was even more theatrical. She sobbed through most of it, barely able to get words out. She talked about giving birth to me, raising me, watching me grow into this successful woman. She said all Shed ever wanted was to be close to her daughter, to be part of my life. She claimed Id said terrible things the last time we spoke, that Id told her I wished she was dead. That lie hit me like a physical blow. Id never said anything remotely like that, but she delivered it with such emotion that people in the gallery gasped. She looked at the jury with tear-filled eyes and said, "I just want my daughter to love me again." Is that too much to ask? The first day of trial destroyed me. Watching my parents lie so effectively, seeing the jury's sympathetic faces, hearing my own brother paint me as a monster, it was almost too much to bear. During breaks, I had to leave the courtroom to compose myself. The media filmed me looking distressed and ran stories about how I couldn't face my sobbing mother's testimony. Social media exploded with commentary, almost all of it condemning me. The hashtag Cancel Marlene was trending. People who'd never met me were calling for my destruction. I went home that night and sat in the dark for hours, wondering how my life had come to this. The second day brought financial experts who testified that I could easily afford to support my parents. They showed my bank statements, obtained through legal discovery, and made my wealth sound obscene. They calculated that $12 million was a small fraction of my net worth, implying that refusing to pay was pure selfishness rather than principle. They suggested that any moral person with my resources would have helped their parents without being asked. The testimony made it sound like I was hoarding wealth while my parents suffered, when the reality was, they'd tried to steal from me repeatedly. During a lunch recess, my parents cornered me in the courthouse hallway. Wade started to step between us, but I waved him off. I wanted to hear what they had to say. My father leaned in close and hissed, "Drop this. Give us the money, or we have more." My mother added, "We have other evidence, things you don't want to come out." They were threatening me with some kind of embarrassing secret, but I knew they were bluffing. They had nothing left. I looked my father in the eye and said, "Bring it. I'm done being afraid of you." He stepped back, surprised. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his face. I walked away feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Power. That evening, Deirdre called me into her office. She laid out her strategy for my defense. We were going to systematically dismantle every lie they'd told. We had witnesses, documents, and that recording. She looked me in the eye and said, "Trust me, we're going to destroy them. I want you to get on that stand and tell the truth, all of it. No holding back, no protecting them, just the truth. I nodded. I was ready. I'd spent my whole life trying to be the good daughter, trying to please them, trying to earn their love. I was done. It was time to fight. Deirdre's opening statement for the defense was nothing like Rodney's emotional manipulation. She was direct and factual. She told the jury this case wasn't about family duty or moral obligations. It was about fraud. She promised to show them evidence of a 30-year pattern of exploitation and manipulation. She said, by the time we're done, you'll see that my client isn't the villain in this story. She's the victim who finally fought back. The jury's attention shifted. I could see some of them sitting up straighter, ready to hear another side of the story they'd been told. Dr. Helena Cartwright was our first witness. My college professor, now retired, testified about finding me distraught during finals week my senior year. She described how my parents had shown up and demanded I drop out to get a job and support them. She explained the panic attacks I'd suffered, how close I'd come to failing my exams because of the emotional devastation. She spoke about my character, calling me the most dedicated and ethical student she'd ever taught. Her testimony was calm and credible. She had no financial stake in the outcome. She was simply telling the truth about what she'd witnessed. The jury listened carefully. Iris took the stand next. My business partner detailed how hard I'd worked to build True Logics. She described the years we'd survived on savings, how I'd taken no salary for the first 2 years, how I'd poured everything into making the company succeed. She testified about my parents showing up only after we became successful, about the investment scam they'd tried to pull, about the fake medical emergency. She described the toll their harassment had taken on me, how Shed found me unable to work, barely able to function. She said Marlene is one of the most generous people I know. She's donated over $2 million to charity anonymously. This case isn't about a greedy daughter. It's about parents who see their child as an ATM. Rex, the private investigator, presented his findings methodically. He showed employment records proving my father had quit his warehouse job voluntarily and hadn't been injured. He presented medical records showing no treatment for any back injury at the hospital my parents claimed. He showed photographs of my parents at casinos during the time they were supposedly suffering in poverty. He presented bank statements showing their spending patterns, luxury purchases made with money they claimed not to have. He laid out the evidence piece by piece, dismantling the story they'd told. The jury's faces changed. Doubt crept in. Some of them glanced at my parents with new expressions. The forensic accountant, Shelby, traced the money trail. She showed how my parents had taken my childhood earnings. She documented the $10,000 I'd sent for the fake medical emergency and proved it had gone to pay off loan sharks. She showed the $100,000 gift I'd given them and how they'd spent it on luxuries within 3 months. She presented evidence of their gambling habits, their debts, their pattern of financial irresponsibility. She testified that the plaintiff's claim of poverty is inconsistent with their actual spending. They're not victims of circumstances. They're victims of their own choices. Character witnesses testified on my behalf. Wade, my bodyguard, said I've provided security for many wealthy people. Most of them treat me like I'm invisible. Marlene learned my kids' names. She asked about my life. She's genuine, in a way that's rare. Business colleagues described my ethics and integrity. Representatives from charities I'd supported anonymously testified about my generosity. The picture they painted was completely different from the greedy, cold daughter my parents had described. The jury was seeing me as a real person, not a caricature. Then came the bombshell. Deirdre called Marjorie as a surprise witness. This elderly woman had been my grandmother's friend. She testified about Kent's inheritance 15 years ago, money our grandmother had left specifically for him. She said Shed witnessed my parents manipulating Kent, promising to invest the money for him. Shed seen the $50,000 disappear. She testified that Shed heard my parents blame me for the loss, even though I'd been away at college and had nothing to do with it. Kent's face went pale. The jury turned to look at him, and I saw realization dawning on some of their faces. Deirdre recalled Kent to the stand for cross-examination. She was relentless. She confronted him with bank records showing the inheritance. She asked him directly who had taken his money, and he couldn't maintain the lie. His story fell apart under questioning. He admitted our parents had taken his inheritance. He admitted had been promised $50,000 from this lawsuit settlement. When Deirdre asked why Head lied about me, he broke down. He said I needed the money. She has so much and I have nothing. It's not fair. The jury's expressions turned from sympathy to disgust. Here was a grown man lying under oath because he wanted money he hadn't earned. Then Deirdre played the recording. The courtroom went completely silent. My father's voice came through the speakers clearly. She's worth millions. We deserve our cut. My mother's voice followed. Well, say whatever we have to say. Kent's voice asked, when do I get my share? My father responded, if she doesn't settle, well, take her to court. We can't lose. The recording played for 3 minutes. 3 minutes of my parents and brother planning every detail of this fraudulent lawsuit. When it ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. People looked shocked. The judge leaned forward, his face dark. The jury members exchanged glances, some of them shaking their heads. Rodney tried to object, claiming the recording was obtained illegally. Deirdre presented documentation showing it had been recorded by a participant in the conversation, making it legal in the state where it was made. An audio forensic expert testified that the recording was authentic and unaltered. Metadata showed it was made 3 years before the lawsuit was filed. There was no way to deny it. This was proof of conspiracy, of fraud, of perjury. My parents' faces had gone white. My mother looked like she might faint. My father stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Kent had his head in his hands. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. Deirdre asked me to tell the jury my story, and I did. I spoke calmly about my childhood, about being told I was an investment. I described the money they took from my jobs. I explained the false medical emergency in college, the attempted investment scam, the staged accident. I detailed every betrayal, every manipulation, every lie. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just told the truth. The jury listened to every word. When Rodney cross-examined me, he tried to make me seem cold. He asked, "Didn't your parents sacrifice for you?" I answered they had children. That's what parents do. Raising me wasn't a sacrifice they get to bill me for later. He asked, "Don't you feel you owe them?" I said I owe them nothing. I didn't ask to be born. They chose to have me. That doesn't make me financially responsible for them for the rest of their lives. Some of the jury members nodded. They understood. Deirdre asked if I had anything I wanted to say to my parents. I turned in my chair to face them directly. The courtroom held its breath. I spoke clearly and firmly. When I was 8 years old, I won a spelling bee. I was so excited to tell my parents. My father said, "Good, now you can get scholarships, and we won't have to pay for college." I was 8. I didn't even know what a scholarship was. When I was 17 and got into Cornell, my mother cried. I thought she was proud. She told me years later she was crying because I was leaving them with nothing. For 32 years, I believed love meant sacrifice. I believed family meant obligation. I worked myself sick trying to earn their approval. But in this courtroom, I learned something. They never loved me. They loved what I could provide. To them, I was never a daughter. I was a resource. So no, Your Honor, I don't owe them $12 million. I don't owe them 12 cents. What I owe myself is freedom from people who see me as a bank account instead of a human being. They say blood is thicker than water, but the full quote is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose mean more than the ones we're born into. I choose to be free. The courtroom was absolutely silent when I finished. Judge Brennan's face had gone pale. He looked at my parents with an expression of disgust. My mother sat speechless, her mouth open, the tissue in her hand forgotten. My father stared at the floor, defeated. Several jury members were nodding. One woman had tears on her cheeks. Iris was crying in the gallery. Wade gave me a subtle nod of respect. Deirdre whispered, "That was perfect." I stepped down from the witness stand feeling lighter than I had in years. Judge Brennan didn't wait for the jury to deliberate. He spoke directly to the courtroom, his voice heavy with anger. "I've been on the bench for 34 years. I've seen many cases. This is one of the most disturbing." He turned to my parents. "You have weaponized the court system to continue exploiting your daughter. This case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning you cannot refile. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to pay the defendant's legal fees in the amount of $240,000, and am referring this case to the district attorney for investigation of fraud, perjury, and conspiracy." My father's head dropped. My mother let out a sound like a wounded animal. Kent looked like he might be sick. The jury foreman asked permission to speak. Judge Brennan nodded. The foreman said, "We want the record to show that even if the case hadn't been dismissed, we would have ruled in favor of the defendant. What we witnessed here was abuse, plain and simple." The other jury members nodded their agreement. It was a complete vindication, and I felt something break loose in my chest. I realized I'd been holding my breath for years, and I could finally exhale. The consequences came swift and severe. Within days, criminal charges were filed against my parents in Kent. Vernon and Phyllis were charged with fraud, perjury, forgery, and conspiracy. Bail was set at $50,000 each, which they couldn't pay. They spent 3 days in county jail before my cousin Laverne bailed them out. Kent was charged as a co-conspirator. He lost his job when his employer saw the news coverage. His girlfriend left him. He became a pariah in what remained of our family. Rodney faced a bar association investigation and was suspended from practicing law for a year. His reputation was destroyed. The media narrative flipped overnight. Headlines changed from tech heiress sued by parents to parents exposed as fraudsters in court. Social media apologized. The hashtag #WeSupportMarlene started trending. Think pieces appeared about why society is too quick to judge successful women. People who'd called me a monster just days before were now praising my courage. It should have felt good, but mostly I just felt exhausted. 6 months later, my parents were convicted. Vernon was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Phyllis got 5 years. They were ordered to pay full restitution for my legal fees plus damages. Their house was foreclosed to pay the debt. Their marriage fell apart in prison, each blaming the other for the disaster. Kent took a plea deal, 2 years probation and community service. He sent me a letter from the halfway house where he was completing his sentence. He wrote, "I'm sorry, I was weak. They manipulated me too, but I let them. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know you were always the strong one." I didn't respond, but I kept the letter. Extended family members reached out to apologize. Most of them had believed my parents' lies. I politely declined most attempts at reconciliation. I needed space. Some relationships eventually healed over time. Others didn't. I made peace with that. My healing journey wasn't quick or easy. I continued therapy multiple times a week. I worked through decades of trauma, learning to recognize manipulation, learning to trust again. I built a chosen family with Iris, Wade, Dr. Cartwright, and close friends who'd stood by me. True Logic's reputation was fully restored. The company's valuation exceeded previous highs. I promoted Iris to co-CEO. We started a foundation called Breaking Free that helped people escape family abuse. Within 2 years, WED helped over 5,000 survivors. The professional success felt good, but the personal growth felt better. I learned what healthy love looked like. I started dating again, carefully, and met Silas, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. He understood my past without needing lengthy explanations. Our relationship built slowly on foundations of honesty and respect. A year later, we got engaged. 3 years after the trial, I visited my parents in prison once. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. My father was still angry and unrepentant. He said, "You put us here," like he bore no responsibility for his own actions. My mother was broken, defeated. She said, "I really thought we deserved that money." I looked at them both and said, "You did deserve something. You deserve to be held accountable." Then I walked away without looking back. It was the last time I saw them. I started speaking publicly about breaking toxic family cycles. At a conference 5 years after the trial, I told my story to hundreds of people. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. People approached me afterward with tears in their eyes, saying they'd lived similar experiences, that they'd felt alone, until hearing my story. That's when I realized the purpose of everything I'd been through. My pain could help others find their strength. In my speech, I said people will tell you that family is everything, that blood matters most, that you owe your parents for giving you life. But here's what I learned. You don't owe anyone your suffering. You don't owe anyone your success. You don't owe anyone access to your life if they use it to hurt you. Real love doesn't demand. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't see you as an investment that needs to pay dividends. I spent 30 years trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. The day I stopped trying was the day I found peace. To anyone out there feeling guilty for setting boundaries with family, your guilt is their last tool of manipulation. Don't let them use it. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. And if the people who raised you can't do that, then you have every right to walk away and build a family of people who choose you every day. Freedom isn't selfish. It's survival. 5 years after the trial, my life looked completely different. I was 37, married to Silas, and WED adopted 2 beautiful children. True Logics had sold for $200 million, and id moved into venture capital, focusing on funding women-led startups. The Breaking Free Foundation had helped over 10,000 abuse survivors. I had no contact with my parents. Vernon had been released after 5 years and was living in subsidized housing, working a minimum wage job. Phyllis had been released after 3 years and had remarried someone who didn't know her past. Neither had attempted to contact me. Kent had completed his probation, moved to a different state, gotten married, and had a daughter. Had sent me a birth announcement. Id sent a small gift. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies anymore either. My chosen family gathered regularly. Iris was my best friend and godmother to my children. Wade had started running security for the foundation and had married with twins of his own. Dr. Cartwright visited quarterly for tea and long conversations. Silas had written a best-selling book about healing from family trauma. We had dinner parties filled with laughter. We celebrated holidays with people who chose to be there. There were no obligations, no guilt trips, no manipulation, just genuine love and support. Standing in my home one evening, watching my children play while Silas cooked dinner and Iris set the table, I looked at the family photo on the wall. Silas, the kids, Iris, Wade, Dr. Cartwright. All the people I'd chosen. There were no photos of my biological family in the house. I realized I wasn't missing anything. I had everything I needed. I'd found peace. Sometimes people ask if I regret taking my parents to court, if I regret exposing them publicly. I don't. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner, because on the other side of that courtroom, beyond the pain and the fear and the public humiliation, was something I'd never had before: freedom. And no amount of money, no family obligation, no guilt trip is worth more than that. I'm free, and I'm never going back. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? Have you struggled with guilt over protecting yourself from people who were supposed to love you? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's going through the same thing. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it gives you the courage to write your own ending. Remember, you deserve to be free. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide, and you are never alone in this fight. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.